Greetings, readers. It's March 2025, and this is Book Buzz, the show where I tell you about this month's exciting new releases and give you some recommendations for books to read in the meantime. Hopefully, by the time you're watching this, there will be a hint of spring outside, although I am recording it in February in the middle of a blizzard. But that's good reading weather, and we've got lots to read, so let's get down to it. First up in March, a horror selection and the book that I am most excited for in all of 2025, and that is The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. From the New York Times bestselling author of The Only Good Indians is a chilling historical horror novel tracing the life of a vampire who haunts the fields of the Blackfeet reservation looking for justice. A diary written in 1912 by a Lutheran pastor is discovered within a wall. What it unveils is a slow massacre, a chain of events that go back to 217 Blackfeet dead in the snow, told in transcribed interviews by a Blackfeet named Good Stab, who shares the narrative of his peculiar life over a series of confessional visits. This is an American Indian revenge story written by one of the new masters of horror, Stephen Graham Jones, and my personal favorite author. For a similar read, in the meantime, if you haven't read it already, you do need to read The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And another one you can try if you've read that is Never Whistle at Night, short stories edited by Shane Hawk and Theodore C. Van Alst Jr., and that one has been on the indie bestseller list for like 30-some weeks, so if you haven't read it yet, you definitely should. Next up, we have a comedic mystery, Finlay Donovan Digs Her Own Grave by Elle Cosimano. Finlay Donovan may have skeletons in her closet, but at least there's not a body in her backyard. Finlay Donovan and her nanny, partner in crime, Vero, have not always gotten along with Finlay's elderly neighbor, Mrs. Haggerty, the community busybody and president of the Neighborhood Watch. But when a dead body is discovered in her backyard, Mrs. Haggerty needs their help. At first a suspect, Mrs. Haggerty is cleared by the police, but her house remains an active crime scene. She has nowhere to go except Finlay's house, right across the street. Finlay and Vero have no interest in getting involved in another murder case or sacrificing either of their bedrooms. After all, they've dealt with enough murders over the last 4 months to last a lifetime, and they both would much rather share their beds with someone else. When the focus of the investigation widens to include Finlay's ex-husband, Stephen, though, Finlay and Vero are left with little choice but to get closer to Mrs. Haggerty and uncover her secrets before the police start digging up theirs. But who will solve the mystery first? For a similar recommendation, you'll want to start this series with Finlay Donovan is Killing It, as well as the rest of them. This new one is book 5. And they can be read as standalones, but I think there's a few things that work better in series. Next up, we have some literary fiction that I'm also very excited about. A novel called Dream Count by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. A publishing event 10 years in the making, a searing, exquisite new novel by the best-selling and award-winning author of AMERICANAH and We Should All Be Feminists, the story of 4 women and their loves, longings, and desires. Chimamanda is a Nigerian travel writer living in America. Alone in the midst of the pandemic, she recalls her past lovers and grapples with her choices and regrets. Zikora, her best friend, is a lawyer who's been successful at everything until, betrayed and broken-hearted, she must turn to the person she thought she needed least. Amelagor, Chiamanda's bold, outspoken cousin, is a financial powerhouse in Nigeria who begins to question how well she knows herself. And Kediatu, Chiamanda's housekeeper, is proudly raising her daughter in America, but faces an unthinkable hardship that threatens all she has worked so hard to achieve. In Dream Count, Adichie trains her fierce eye on these women in a sparkling, transcendent novel that takes up the very nature of love itself. Is true happiness ever attainable, or is it just a fleeting state? And how honest must we be with ourselves in order to love and to be loved? A trenchant reflection on the choices we make and those made for us, on daughters and mothers, on our interconnected world, Dream Count pulses with emotional urgency and poignant, unflinching observations of the human heart in a language that soars with beauty and power. It confirms Adichie's status as one of the most exciting and dynamic writers on the literary landscape. Another modern literary classic saga about a woman and her family is Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee, which I love and highly recommend, and I cannot wait for Dream Count. Next up, we have a thriller, All the Mothers Hate Me by Sarah Harmon. That is such a great title. Florence Grimes is a 31-year-old party girl who always takes the easy way out. Single, broke, and unfulfilled after the humiliating end to her girl band career, she has only one reason to get out of bed each day, her 10-year-old son Dylan. But then Alfie Risby, her son's bully and the heir to a vast frozen food empire, mysteriously vanishes during a class trip, and Dylan becomes the prime suspect. Florence, for once, is faced with a task she can't quit. She's got to find Alfie and clear her son's name or risk losing Dylan forever. The only problem? Florence has no useful skills, let alone investigative ones, and all the other school moms hate her. Oh, and Florence has reason to suspect Dylan might not be as innocent as she'd like to believe. Hilarious and twisted, propulsive and furious, All the Other Mothers Hate Me is the must-read book of 2025. It sounds very entertaining. For another humorous thriller, try Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. Next up, a romance novel, The Gilded Heiress by Joanna Shupe. From USA Today best-selling author Joanna Shupe comes a spicy Anastasia story full of secrets and betrayal set among the glittering streets of New York City's Gilded Age. In 1880, a baby was stolen from the wealthiest family in America. Though no ransom was ever demanded, the Pendleton family never gave up hope, and their reward became the stuff of legend. After being raised in a children's asylum, Josie Smith ends up on the streets and quickly learns how to take care of herself. Her singing voice draws crowds on every corner, and she'll stop at nothing to become famous and travel the world, loved and adored by all. Maybe then she won't think about the family who gave her away as an infant. Leo Hardy isn't afraid to use his charm and wits to make a fast buck, especially with a mother and 5 siblings to support. When he stumbles upon a beautiful young woman singing on the street, Leo notices her striking resemblance to the infamous missing baby's mother, Mrs. Thomas Pendleton. The Hardys lost everything thanks to the Pendletons, and once Leo sees Josie, he seizes the opportunity to settle the score. All he needs to do is pull off the biggest swindle of his career. As the two are catapulted into Knickerbocker high society, they grow closer to their goal as well as to each other. But secrets can only stay hidden for so long. Soon the truth unfolds, and both Josie and Leo must separate what's real from what's just gilding. For another romantic thriller set in the 1920s, try The Paragon Hotel by Lindsay Fay. Next up, an exciting new release for fantasy fans, The Ragpicker King by Cassandra Clare. In the epic follow-up to the New York Times bestseller Swordcatcher, praised by George R.R. Martin as everything I look for in fantasy, Lynn and Kell must chart a perilous course between love and lies. Kell Saren, body double to Connor, the crown prince of the dazzling city of Castellane, is caught between two worlds. In order to protect his beloved prince, Kell must find the culprits responsible for a massacre at the royal palace, and the only clues are held by the Ragpicker King, the notorious criminal who rules Castellane's underworld. The trail Kell follows leads back to Hill, where among decadent nobles and glittering parties at a dark conspiracy to destroy the royal family has taken hold, a conspiracy headed up by the monstrous Artel Grimont, the man engaged to marry the woman Kell loves. Meanwhile, Lynn Castor must face the aftermath of the greatest risk she's ever taken. To save the life of a dying friend, Lynn has falsely claimed to be the goddess reborn, the legendary heroine destined to save her people. Now the terrifying but strangely magnetic leader of her people has arrived to test her powers. The price of failure is exile, and only through her alliance with the Ragpicker King can she continue to access the magic that may save her. Then Prince Connor reappears in her life, demanding that she use her healing powers to cure the madness of his father, the king. Lynn soon realizes the king is gripped by an ancient and terrible magic, one whose lure she cannot deny any more than she can deny her growing passion for Connor. As the simmering tensions in Castelline reach a fever pitch, Lynn and Kell must decide who to trust when any false move means death or worse. Sounds very exciting. So read the first book first, and then get ready for this release. And for more genre-bending epic fantasy, try 5 Broken Blades by Mai Corland. Another fantasy release that I am mentioning specifically for Julia, who comes to our Not Your Classic Book Club, who loves this series, Book 6 of the Glass Library by C.J. Archer, called The Journal of 1,000 Years. An ancient family diary, a timely prophecy, an epic conclusion. As Sylvia prepares to meet Gabe's parents for the first time, the last thing she needs is for her long-lost father to cause trouble. While his answers to her questions finally bring clarity, they also usher in danger. But that's not all her elusive father brings into Sylvia's life. His treasured gift of an ancient journal passed down through the generations connects her to the past with its mystical spells and captivating stories. Yet it's the cryptic prophecy written on magical pages that captures Sylvia's attention, hinting at a destiny entwined with Gabe's. Does it relate to the threat of abduction that has dogged him for months? The world's fascination with his miraculous survival has drawn unwanted attention, leading to the desperate attempts to unravel the secrets behind his extraordinary abilities. When these efforts fail, his enemies resort to drastic measures, targeting Sylvia to lure Gabe into their clutches. Despite her caution, Sylvia realizes she may have inadvertently placed Gabe in danger. Has his luck finally run out? Only time will reveal the truth. So this is book 6 in the series, so if it sounds good, start with book 1, The Librarian of Crooked Lane. Next up for science fiction fans, we have Luminous by Sylvia Park. Prescient yet timeless, this highly anticipated sweeping debut set in a unified Korea tells the story of 3 estranged siblings, 2 human, 1 robot, as they collide against the backdrop of a murder investigation to settle old scores and make sense of their shattered childhood. I once had a family, at least the earliest version of me had a family. In a reunified Korea of the near future, the sun beats down on a junkyard filled with abandoned robots broken down for parts. 11-year-old Ruiji sifts through the scraps, searching for a piece that might support her failing body. There among the piles of trash, something catches her eye. A robot boy. So lifelike and strange, unlike anything she's ever seen before. Siblings June and Morgan haven't spoken for years. When they were children, their brother Yo-Yo disappeared suddenly, leaving behind only distant memories of his laughter and near-human warmth. Yo-Yo, an early prototype of a humanoid robot designed by their father, was always bound for something darker and more complex. Now Morgan makes robots for a living and is on the verge of losing control of her most important creation. June is a detective with the Robot Crimes Unit whose investigation is digging up truths that want to stay buried. And whether they like it or not, Ruiji's discovery will thrust their family back together in ways they could never have imagined. At once thrilling work of speculative fiction and a poignant exploration of what it really means to be human, Luminous is an unforgettably brilliant debut. It sounds amazing and heart-wrenching. I'm definitely reading this one. For another slipstream literary novel with speculative elements, try Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. Next up, for historical fiction fans, we have a new book by Chris Bojalian, The Jackal's Mistress. In this Civil War love story, inspired by a real-life friendship across enemy lines, the wife of a missing Confederate soldier discovers a wounded Yankee officer and must decide what she's willing to risk for the life of a stranger, from the New York Times best-selling author of such acclaimed historical fiction as The Hour of the Witch and The Sandcastle Girls. Virginia, 1864. Libby Stedman's husband has been away for so long that she can barely conjure his voice in her dreams. While she longs for him in the night, fearing him dead in a Union prison camp, her days are spent running a gristmill with her teenage niece, a hired hand, and his wife, all the grain they can produce requisitioned by the Confederate Army. It's an uneasy life in the Shenandoah Valley, the territory frequently changing hands, control swinging back and forth like a pendulum between north and south, and Libby awakens every morning expecting to see her land a battlefield. And then she finds a gravely injured Union officer left for dead in a neighbor's house, the bones of his hand and leg shattered. Captain Jonathan Weybridge of the Vermont Brigade is her enemy, but he's also a human being, and Libby must make a terrible decision. Does she leave him to die alone, or does she risk treason and try to nurse him back to health? And if she succeeds, does she try to secretly bring him across Union lines where she might negotiate a trade for news of her own husband? A vivid and sweeping story of two people navigating the boundaries of love and humanity in a landscape of brutal violence. The Jackal's Mistress is a heart-stopping new novel based on a largely unknown piece of American history from one of our greatest storytellers. For a classic Civil War historical fiction novel, try Cold Mountain by Charles Fraser. Last up, our nonfiction release for this month sounds so exciting and is also going on my TBR. The Mesopotamian Riddle, an archaeologist, a soldier, a clergyman, and the race to decipher the world's oldest language by Joshua Hammer. A rollicking adventure starring three free-spirited Victorians on a 20-year quest to decipher cuneiform, the oldest writing in the world, from the New York Times best-selling author of The Badass Librarians of Timbuktu. I might need to read that one too. It was one of history's great vanishing acts. Around 3,400 BCE, as humans were gathering in complex urban settlements, a scribe in the mud-walled city-state of Uruk picked up a reed stylus to press tiny symbols into clay. For 3 millennia, wedge-shaped cuneiform script would record the military conquests, scientific discoveries, and epic literature of the great Mesopotamian kingdoms of Sumer, Assyria, and Babylon, and of Persia's mighty Achaemenid Empire, along with precious minutiae about everyday life in the cradle of civilization. And then the meaning of the characters was lost. London, 1857. In an era obsessed with human progress, mysterious palaces emerging from the desert sands had captured the Victorian public's imagination. Yet Europe's best philologists struggled to decipher the bizarre inscriptions excavators were digging up. Enter a swashbuckling archaeologist, a suave British military officer turned diplomat, and a cloistered Irish rector, all vying for glory in a race to decipher this script that would enable them to peek further back into human history than ever before. From the ruins of Persepolis to a lawless outpost of the crumbling Ottoman Empire, the Mesopotamian riddle whisks you on a wild adventure through the golden age of archaeology in an epic quest to understand our past. For more exciting nonfiction about ancient history, try The Other Ancient Civilizations, Decoding Archaeology's Less Celebrated Cultures by Raven Todd De Silva. So that's all for this month's new releases, but we are still going to have our bonus segment. As you may know by now, it is Oshkosh Public Library's 125th anniversary this year. And so to celebrate that, at the end of Book Buzz, I'm talking about bestsellers from bygone eras. And for March, we're talking about the decade between 1920 and 1930. Our best-selling author for the decade is a man named George Warwick Deeping. He studied medicine and science and served in the military in World War I, after which he left medicine to write novels. He had 7 best-selling novels in the 1920s, the most well-known of which is called Sorrel and Son, which was published in 1925. His works were largely historical romance and focused heavily on social issues, such as social work, alcoholism, spouse abuse, shell shock, pollution of the water supply, and gender ambiguity. He published 65 books in his lifetime, and 7 books were published posthumously. 5 of his books were made into movies in the silent film era. Sorrel and Son was originally a silent film, then was remade again in the 30s, and then made into a TV series again in the 1980s. And Nina Library actually has the series on DVD if you want to watch it. So he was quite well known in his time, but I hadn't heard of him. The most recognizable title from the decade's bestseller list you might recognize, though, and that is All Quiet on the Western Front by Erich Maria Remarque, the epic account of the experiences of a German soldier in the trenches of World War I. So that concludes our March episode of Book Buzz. It was nice chatting books with you, and I will be back next month for more recommendations. Bye.